hear it now. I can hear it now. I hear the sounds of your heartbeat. I can hear it now. I can hear it now. I hear the sounds of your heartbeat. I can hear it now. I can hear it now.
All right, so I'm taking some time here for one of my first heartbeat conversations with Cory Morgan from the Western Standard and Epoch Times. You've probably seen him on Twitter or through one of his stories feeds or on one of the other shows. So welcome aboard here, Cory, to some of my political conversations. And as I just kind of talked about, I'm just kind of looking at what we're all facing coming out of the post-scamdemic world, and I refuse to call it a pandemic because they lied to us about the entire thing, and I don't feel that a lot of Canadians are really on board with it anymore. Even though we're still seeing deaths coming that they're classifying as COVID mortalities. So what we've seen is a complete change in the political scene and the way that things are being handled and rolled out to us. We're starting to see some investigations into the Liberal government. We're seeing some exciting things happening inside of the province with Rachel Notley stepping down from the NDP and quite a few contenders that are stepping up. So we got Sarah Hoffman and Gil, whatever his name is, and Naheed Nenshi. So those seem to be like the biggest contenders, and I'm not just talking by absolute mass size, but more on the who they are and where they are in the NDP party. So, without having to hop directly into the political side of things, Cory, you've lived through the pandemic, and I'd imagine it's taken some toll on you, your family, and that sort of thing. Do you want to take a couple of seconds and just kind of explain where you guys are and how you're kind of settling in this post-scamdemic world?
Yeah, well, I'm just like a lot of people trying to look with hindsight and just see how bad this was, how poorly it was rolled out, put upon us. As you said, I guess more people are waking up. I got to admit, I wasn't one of the hardcore well, I was always anti-restriction. I was always anti-lockdown. I did get a couple of jabs, but I was always anti-enforcement of it. I mean, it had to be a personal choice. But when we look back, it's getting clear the stuff that people were saying on day one is quite true. That I mean, kids have always been immune from this. I mean, I believe there was a bug going around, but we've had that periodically happening since the beginning of time. The scope and risk of what this presented clearly, and you've been showing some fantastic graphics online to show the lack of correlation between vaccination and harm done by this infection it's just it's absurd. But I don't know yet. I really don't know if enough of the population at large is looking back on this and saying, "Wow, we got screwed. We got fed misinformation. We got our businesses shut down. We got events canceled. We missed out on family events, or we had families and friends splitting apart over the issue." A lot of this is terribly unforgivable. I don't know if enough people realize that yet, though. I'm frightened. I'm frightened in that it could happen again, because I don't see enough appetite on people's parts to say, if the government tries this again, I'm going to push back. I think there'll be more, but I don't know if there'll be enough.
And that's actually a really good point. And that's a lot of the reason that I'm doing the series on Heartbeat is because I really want to see what people are having to say and how this has really impacted them and if they're willing to come forward now. I mean, it's not just that we were locked down. It's just that there was a lot of us that were deeply censored. They came after our jobs. They came after us personally. I know you've had some attacks on you yourself, threats, all that sort of jazz. So during the pandemic or during the lockdowns, when neighbors were asked to report on their neighbors, were you caught up in any of that? I know you're out rural, so it was, nobody's really watching your property too closely, but I know the one Christmas, our kids were afraid to come over for Christmas Eve just for the simple reason is they weren't allowed to. Did you guys
Yeah,
face that out in the rural?
Well, we got the threats in the workplace, for example. We had some clowns threatening, and reporting the Western Standard because we never shut down our office, despite what. And we made no bones about it. Hey, we're going to work. What are you going to do about it? And I forget his name. Uh, Political ham he goes by online, whatever. He's a douchebag, but he kept reporting the Standard, Alberta Health Services, saying these guys are open, and they didn't come after us. But I mean, I saw things like I've got a large family. Jane and I are a blended family. We've got a lot of kids. We've got a couple of kids who still to this day are talking to each other over fights over the vaccine. Like, this is so absurd. And I mean, this is just one example of what are probably hundreds of thousands. I mean, family is so essential. It's so critical. We got lots of important things we can fight with each other, and we're fighting over this damn vaccine and losing time, losing relationships. And this has divided our society and pointlessly. So, I mean, I didn't see it as badly as some people. We were lucky. Our kids are out of the house. We're self-employed. It was harder for the state to get the gun against our heads. But a lot of people didn't have the kind of flexibility that we did. Yeah, we live in a rural area. So if there were 3 extra cars parked in front of our place, nobody was going to notice it, and nobody was going to report it. But I mean, yeah, the scene in Calgary, it's chilling, or everywhere, I guess, when you're talking about reporting on your neighbors. I mean, that's Soviet sort of stuff. And, it's going to take a long time for a lot of people to get over this.
Yeah, and I know, like, my kids lived a couple of blocks away, and one of their friends that was like on the same crescent, they'd been reported. So I mean, the cops showed up there, and my kids had also been reported. So cops showed up there, and that's what they were scared about. These $500 fines or 150. I can't even remember what they were. I think they were like $500 fines. And even at that time, I just said to my kids, you know what? If they want to come by and they want to fine us for having our children at home, one, you're on your driver's licenses or on your pieces of ID, it still lists this as your home address. So, what are they going to really say or do? But I mean, we do have a lot of people over throughout the season and whatnot. And that basically shut down. And I think this last Christmas, we were still feeling the impacts. It just wasn't a Christmassy Christmas because of the whole fabric of our family. And, as much as we tried to hold together has somewhat changed. It's so strange. And to think, what are we looking at moving forward, even through, things like Bill C-63, where, they could try to control the social media platforms, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn. But now they've lost that ability through their emergency measures and through their misinformation, disinformation shtick. So now they're going to be coming after our words just based on what they deem as hate. I mean, that seems a little insane to me. It's like they're trying to do the pandemic, but without having the benefit of a pandemic.
Well, and part of why I think the world went insane during the pandemic was the authorities cracked down and through social media platforms on rational discourse. I mean, as this was unfolding, as I was looking to discuss these things on my show, we found that if I even say the word vaccine on my show, YouTube is going to shut us down. And it wasn't like I was saying, don't take a vaccine, take a vaccine. I was just saying, we want to talk about this. We're rolling this thing out in a rush. People aren't sure. We want to see the numbers. We want to see the science behind this, but we can't even discuss it or we will lose our platform. If other people had been able to speak up, speak freely, I mean, yeah, sure, my world wouldn't end if we got shut off of YouTube and Facebook and all of that. But as a broadcaster, as a small media outlet, it would certainly harm us. So, I mean, we're just one of thousands, I'm sure, that just avoided the subject when we should have been discussing it. And now the government since then has been bringing in even more legislation, C-63, C-18, C-11. They are obsessed with controlling information. And this is exactly why. I think they realize, wow, we can get away with a hell of a lot of shit if we can just shut down every other voice or at least control what they're saying. And that's really problematic, whether it comes to a pandemic or any other aspect where you might be opposing what the government wants to do.
Well, and it's not just that, it's just how much more millions and billions that we're pumping into legacy media to control the narrative through, what they wanted us to hear and what they wanted us to pay attention. So, I mean, I feel so fortunate to be on some of the social media networks where, people were exposing this, despite being under threat of being banned and, people having to open up multiple accounts and you having to follow them multiples of times just to get through this. I mean, I remember on LinkedIn, when this is all kind of going on and they were forcing people into the vaccinations and there were chambers of commerce that were celebrating people being fired for not being vaccinated and then celebrating even harder when they couldn't get employment insurance. And like I sat back and just thought to myself, like, who are these people? Well, you don't see a lot of the same stuff out in the real world. When you're out buying groceries or, out for coffee or lunch or whatever, everything seems to be going on normally. But then, you think about like which one of these people was ready to either rat me out or that celebrated, or even tried to have us fired or shut down even further. It's and I met up with some folks over the weekend, and there's still some harsh feelings inside of their circles, and for that exact reason is that these people were so pro jab, they ostracized those that weren't, and wished all the hurtful, harmful things towards them, and people are still closed down today.
Oh, yeah. And I mean, it showed how it got almost cult-like or definitely mob-like. And that's what was being fed by the establishment, by the media, that, these are bad people. These are people that want to hurt everybody. These are selfish people. The people who aren't vaccinated. And even when the evidence was clear that they couldn't even hide it, whatever this vaccine may or may not do, it doesn't stop the spread. It doesn't stop the spread. The second it was proven that it doesn't stop the spread, all efforts to coerce and force people to take this bloody thing should have stopped. It should have been purely voluntary. It always should have been purely voluntary. But I mean, at that point, but they didn't. They didn't back down. They doubled down. They pushed. They ostracized. They bankrupted. They fined. And the only silver lining, if there's any to be seen out of this, is the establishment exposed itself on a couple of fronts. Like I'll start with one, is legacy media. There was a boom time for the Standard and all independent media during the convoy because people turned on their TV. They were fascinated by what's going on in Ottawa, and they would turn on Global, they would turn on CBC, and they would turn on CTV, and they saw the exact same crap on all three channels. Like it was something that drove home to people what some of us have always been screaming. These guys don't have independent news. They parrot the government line. And even though they were constantly doing retractions and corrections and they were fear mongering and claiming there were guns, and people could see that wasn't the case. And they came to us. They flooded to independent media. Like our subscriptions just went through the roof during that period. And it wasn't necessarily that people even supported the convoy that much, but they realized that I'm getting fed crap from the establishment media. I need to get out there and find out what's, more or something broad. So, I mean, that's a good development that kind of came out of it, exposed them. And as you mentioned, I'm glad you mentioned it was chambers. Like Calgary's Chamber of Commerce is a friggin' joke. Deborah Yedlin is incompetent. She should not be heading that thing. She was a business writer. She knows nothing about business. They're all part of the champagne set that goes out to their cocktail parties with the mayor and brings in DEI and woke garbage when they should be representing businesses. And that really got exposed as well. I thought the biggest one of them all was when those ridiculous vaccine passports, and I was a restaurant and bar owner for 5 years. I sold right when the pandemic was beginning, thankfully, or scamdemic, or whatever you might want to refer to it as. But I mean, I've got some knowledge on how that industry works. And Yedlin was saying when we were finally getting rid of that stupid thing where you'd have to scan people at the door before allowing them to come into a restaurant, before you're getting rid of the vaccine passport, that restaurants wanted to keep it. She was saying it's good for business to have it there. She was saying customers feel more safe as long as that's there, and we shouldn't take it away because it'll hurt business by taking it away. How profoundly stupid and full of crap is this woman claiming to represent businesses? There's no way any restaurant owner on the planet was going to say, yes, I would like to have something at my door that eliminates the potential of having 25% of the customer mass out there, that gets my staff harassed, that adds another expense to things, that discourages people from coming into my business. That's nuts. That's just absolutely nuts. Yet the head of a chamber of a city of over 1 million people said just that, and she's still heading that organization right now. But at least hopefully more businesses and more people have seen legacy media is crap, and these chambers of commerce, most of them are garbage as well.
And, just going along, taking along the lines of, what we've seen for the convoy reporting, the protests in Ottawa and, there a lot in Calgary. I mean, when they did report, they definitely weren't reporting the numbers for the support size. But let's look at the contrast between that and what we were seeing with the whole Hamas, Palestinian, pro-Palestinian movements inside of what Vancouver, Victoria, Calgary, we've seen them, Ottawa, Toronto. What do you think the reporting's like on those? Like, how accurate do you think we're seeing things?
It's really hard to tell. I mean, we've seen enough, and that's the great thing with the cameras and phones that people have now. I mean, you can angle a crowd and make it massive, or you can angle it and make it look tiny. And they did that chronically during the pandemic. Again, that was more where the media was exposing itself. In Calgary, there were gatherings in the park of thousands of people protesting on Saturdays against the mandates. And legacy media would report, if they reported on it at all, as being a couple hundred. And then if you get, 3 dozen, pro Hamas protesters on a street corner, they're going to say that this was a massive outpouring of support for Palestine. The slant, though, I mean, hey, independent media can slant too. There's no doubt about that. And the bottom line is what it shows is a need for as many sources as possible. We need more eyes on the ground. We need more outlets covering things. We need more opinions coming out there, not less. And Canadian landscape with the subsidized media and everything else is doing the opposite. It's bringing a smaller number of larger media outlets, which with a higher level of bias, and it bodes poorly for all of us right now.
Yeah, and you'd said something on Twitter the other day. I think it was along the lines of subsidized media is a subservient media.
Mm-hmm.
And
Absolutely.
and that's because they can be captured, they can be controlled, and they can be told what they're allowed to say and not say.
Well, you don't shake the tree that pays your bills. I talked to you a little bit about that before. I mean, I admit we aren't controlled by our advertisers at the Standard, but if there's a story that's going to really infuriate one of our prime advertisers, we might think twice about running it. Let somebody else cover it or something. You get even an unconscious bias that comes a little bit, when you're being funded. And the thing is, too, the thing that keeps outlets from being totally biased by their advertisers is having a plethora of advertisers. You have a whole bunch of them because you're not just dependent on one. But when you have legacy media dependent on government subsidies, that's their one big benefactor, their one big sugar daddy. They're not going to be critical of the government. They know that they could end up getting their bloody funding pulled. And even if they don't want to go that route, financially, they're going to go that route. And it's a dangerous, dangerous place to go. It's not good at all.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting that, we've seen all the layoffs from CTV and from CBC over the last 6 months. It was what, Q4 of 2023, CBC let go of what, 600 people, and then CTV another 400. And I know that they're not all media. I mean, it's, there's going to be cameras and crews and all the rest of that goes along with it. But to me, it seems shocking that none of these people are standing up and saying, this is what we went through during this time. I'd seen, in the early days, some of the people were coming out and saying, yeah, no, they're shutting us down. We're not allowed to talk about this. Producers and, they try and get out with just a small peep of what we were all seeing, and they'd be shut down and they'd be warned or they'd be outright fired. But now we're this, like I said, this post-scamdemic world. These people, they towed the line for the entire time and they're now under the bus and there's nothing that they can do about it. I mean, they're in an industry that's completely collapsing upon itself because of the terrible job and the terrible things that they'd said and because of the lines that they'd followed. It just seems shocking to me that there's not more people that are coming out and saying, you know what, this was a terrible time and this is what we had to do. And now I want to actually talk about some of the things that I wasn't allowed to talk about and grab their little piece of independence as well. Do you think these people are holding on for, maybe I'll get on with another network or, maybe I can move to global or some local station?
There's some of that. There's like some spoke up and ended up, moving on. Like Matt Horwood was with mainstream media and he ended up coming to the Standard and then moving on to Epoch Times. Rachel Emmanuel, she was, I think, right for the Hill Times and ended up with True North. I mean, they did speak up and got booted, but they moved into independent media. But there's only so many voice spaces in independent media. Uh, I think a lot of them, I hate to say it, but they're being quiet as they get laid off because they're gunning for government comms positions. That's the dream job for somebody in media who doesn't really care about media. They just want a paycheck. You want to get into comms. You want to get one of those government roles where you're going to get a nice pension, reasonable hours, a huge severance package if your benefactor gets loses the election. And so I think they're still going to keep their lips zipped because they're looking for those spots rather than staying in media. They're also realizing there's nowhere else to go in media. It's you mentioned CTV and CBC. Another big one that's looming, I've been watching, is Chorus Entertainment. They have global TV and a lot of radio stations and things, and their stock price is down to 70 cents a share. I think it's down to something massive amount. Like it used to be $70 a share or something 8 years ago. Like they are in the toilet. They've stopped putting out dividends. They're massively in debt. It's not a matter of whether they're going to lay off and start cutting or not. It's just a matter of when. So again, it's nerve wracking for the people working for those organizations. But where are they going to go when they leave there? I mean, if they don't find an independent outlet, then they're going to probably look for a government job. And to get a government job, you got to show that you toe that government line.
Yeah, I guess that's kind of all the way through. And now we've seen some information that's being posted. I think can't remember who cracked it, about the amount of money that was paid to social media influencers for pushing the jab and pushing the narrative. And I mean, like, I'm a little offended at our tax money that's actually even just going towards the idea of paying social media. Some of the advertising that we've seen that was put out by the governments themselves, and then those people that were pushing those messages independently of that, and some people that were just being truly horrible, made tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars. Like, to me, it's obscene, and they didn't seem to do a lot of vetting on those tracks, and there didn't seem to be any oversight on it, which, I mean, I'm not really shocked about that. When we see what's coming out with the Arrive Scam app, and we look at, what else is kind of flown under the radar, an $80,000 proposed app that's cost $60 million. And then try and rationalize, where did this thing go so sideways? It's phenomenal. So yeah, we see that there's no oversight, but it's not that they're just paying the legacy media. It's they're trying to infiltrate inside of social media circles, trying to bolster these messages that support the government line. And as somebody that's on social media and somebody that has my own little platform, I mean, I don't, I'm sponsored basically by the people that that are open to giving me a couple of bucks for a subscription fee. And inside of that, I mean, I tell everybody the same. Like, I'm going to present all the same information. So whether you pay or not, you're still going to see all the content. It's just that a lot of people have stepped up to kind of help me in my quest and help, cover a couple of my expenses and stuff, which I greatly appreciate. So, I mean, I'm really not bound so much to the advertisers, but I am bound to the content in the same way that you guys are. I mean, if I start writing crap that nobody wants to read, or if I start getting too biased, everybody's just going to kind of fall off on that. And I know what it's like to get going again. When I was kicked off of Twitter, when Jack still owned the platform, I think I was at some 20,000 followers, and you work really hard to get that kind of going. And then one day, all of those voices are gone. All of those, the supportive messages, all of the crowd that you built, and to think I could go back and try and rebuild that, and I just wasn't going to do it. So I think that there's a lot of these people that are kind of afraid to, take what little they do have left and try and start again inside of independent or inside of their own little circles.
Well, yeah, you can't discount the importance of social media, whether it's Twitter or TikTok, as far as that goes. If somebody's built a following, that's where people are getting a lot of their content these days, whether it's good content, bad content, whatever. That's where a lot of the information is flowing. And the government's recognizing that, and they're scared of that. And that's why they've tried to dip their toe in. I think it was Blacklocks that exposed that, but I could be wrong. But yeah, they were taking dollars from a ministry and pumping it into Twitter personalities. It's an underhanded way of, again, though, a corrupted, bloated bureaucracy and government that's been in for way too long. I mean, with the arrogance of trying to dip into that field of information, and they're not going to stop. And that's only what we know about. I can promise you nobody's offering money to conservative commentators online, or at least I haven't qualified for any of it yet, and I don't want them to. It's got to be a merit-based system, at least, at the very least, if the government's supposed to fund anything. I think Musk was even talking about that. Everything should be labeled. It should have a certain color star next to it, whether it's on Twitter or YouTube or you name it, basically saying, hey, this person's funded by the government, because that says a whole heck of a lot. And maybe people will think twice about taking their content seriously, or some of these people will think twice about taking that money.
And he did do that with CBC for a moment in time, calling him propaganda, and that sort of caused all sorts of insanity until CBC tried to prove that, you know, a lot of their funding comes from actual advertising. So they showed an advertising revenue, and I don't think what they did bother breaking out is that the advertising revenue comes from the government of Canada. So, you know, we're paying for them, we're sponsoring them independently, as you know, as propaganda. And then for them to show additional advertising is the government of Canada. They're also paying for their advertising spots to come up. And then I think it was through C11 when, you know, Trudeau had finally worked out with Google to start throwing some kickbacks towards the media. That I think what we're seeing there too is that, you know, Trudeau just said, well, we'll give you more advertising dollars. You just have to give a portion of it back to us. And we'll call that our advertising revenue. So it's, I mean, they're stacking these taxpayer funded programs on top of each other to make it look like there's some sort of independence inside of there when it's just an illusion.
Yeah, it's not independent, it's inbred. And they're just keeping that money inside and cycling it through their own organizations. And it's repugnant. I mean, even outside of the government advertising that the CBC is sucking in, which again is another, you know, subsidy, of course, is they're stealing advertising dollars from the private market. And I'll say stealing when you're getting $1.5 billion a year, when you add the government advertising and the direct subsidy, and then you still go out there and sell hundreds of millions of dollars of advertising that could be going to independent private outlets. I mean, the advertisers have finite budgets. It just doubles down on how destructive the CBC is. I mean, it's a semi-state broadcaster, but if you're gonna do it, which it shouldn't even be there at all, but if you must do it, they should be true to it. Have absolutely no advertising. Exist solely on government dollars. But when you got a foot on each side of that bridge, then you're screwing everybody on every front. And the worst part is nobody's watching their crap anyways. We're spending a whole lot of money. It's just an employment program for bureaucrats and self-important arseholes with their TV shows that are over budget that nobody's really watching anymore anyway.
Yeah. Going into, let's call it pre-scamdemic world, because you were with Western Standard. How long have you been with Western Standard now?
Pretty much since it was founded. So I think we're coming up on 4 or 5 years this fall. Not sure. Well, since it was refounded, it was around in another incarnation back in the early 2000s when Israel Levant owned it.
Okay. So for what you've seen in how media is kind of reporting on things to what you see now, I mean, vastly different, or like has it opened your eyes to a lot of what we're seeing here, or has this been the kind of thing that we've always seen? It's just more people are aware of it, and they've done a much worse job at trying to hide what they're actually doing.
I think it's always been there, though I do think it's gotten worse. And I most definitely think it's gotten exposed. That's what I was saying is the whole pandemic, scandemic thing really put a spotlight on these organizations. And that's why I was saying so many people came flooding to outlets like the Standard and others, because when they saw just how slanted and biased the establishment media outlets were, they wanted to see something else. The public aren't as stupid as a lot of people seem to assume they are, or as sheep-like. When they know they're being fed BS, they take offense to it, and they want to find another source. I mean, I think they understand the Standard is a conservative-leaning organization. It doesn't mean we torque our stories or our news content, but most of the opinion people are conservative-leaning, and we tend to report on stories of interest to a conservative audience. As long as it's known where you're leaning, it's not such a bad thing. there was always bias in media. The CBC put me through the ringer 20 some years ago when I was leading the AIP. That was what really drove home just how bad it is. But people now in general are seeing it, and that's a good thing.
Yeah, no, and I 100% agree with you. And it's from there, we're like, how do we move forward? Like, what are we going to be seeing moving forward now? We've seen what we had, where we came from, and there's a lot of, I'm going to call it gaslighting that still goes on inside of the legacy media, inside of, all the social media platforms. And when we look at something like, Nenshi hopping on scene right now, and I mean, he wants everybody to believe that he was like, last to the races and the last person in, and he's the underdog. And yet he shows up with hundreds of followers that he'd already pre-organized and signs and the entire campaign. And so, I mean, like there's a certain portion of people that just straight up don't tune into media at all, that don't care what's going on. They're too busy with their own lives. And I think that's why we see a lot of voter apathy, or that's why I guess the final weeks into any election are the most important. Now, for the last provincial election and even the last mayoral for Calgary, there was a lot of advertising money that was thrown by the unions into supporting certain candidates, which we'd seen. And I mean, we're going through the recall on Gondek right now, and I'm not sure where we're at with that. I haven't touched base with anybody, but I did plan on keeping up a little bit better. I just fell out of the loop, so to speak. But what we're seeing coming into the next, I mean, we're looking at 3 years potentially of Nenshi advertising on all these same social media platforms. Like, are we going to see the same impacts from this, or people are just going to finally tune the rest of this out like they do with the rest of media?
I hope they'll tune it out. So, I mean, Nenshi to a degree, he disappeared for a little bit, but he's been overexposed. I mean, people started again seeing him for what he is. They were getting tired of him. The Calgarian electors were getting tired of him towards the end. I mean, he was innovative in the beginning. He was one of the early adopters of Twitter as a platform to get to those people who don't watch conventional media. And then on top of that, he became a darling to the legacy media. So he got a disproportionate amount of coverage on those legacy outlets. But that was then. People are looking elsewhere now. But we can look forward to, because he is in some senses, not the existing establishment, because we have a UCP government, but the establishment organization's candidate. He's the ones the unions want, or he will be. I mean, him and Gill, it's going to be interesting to watch those guys fight that out. But the legacy media outlets, the Deborah Yellins with the Chambers of Commerce, those groups, that massive activist advocacy sector, I guess you could almost say. And then she's tapped into all of that, and we're going to hear a lot out of it. I guess it remains to be seen whether people will see through his crap this time, or if he's actually going to start swinging the needle in Alberta. But we'll see. He hasn't won that leadership yet either.
No, but I mean, with the union funding, AFL president Gil McGowan, that's his name, Gil McGowan.
Yeah.
When he tried to arrange a counter protest in Edmonton, there was like 12 people that showed up. I mean, that was when his infamous middle finger inside of his little ski mitten was
Yeah.
was being shown. So I think he's got the union funds that'll back him, but I'm not sure that he has the union support. I don't think anybody really likes the guy. And I mean, for obvious reasons, but so yeah, I think that there's going to be some interesting battles inside of that. But even moving from the provincial onto the federal, we've seen what the coalition government has done over the last couple of years. And I mean, it was no secret that the NDP were backing a lot of the liberal plays before the official supply and confidence deal that was inked. They do have some of the similar platforms on, the climate scam and, socialism. Let's go with that, giving everybody everything for free, or at least leading to the idea that everything's free. So we know that there's been somewhat of a coalition since, Justin was first elected. And that's carried really big in the last couple of years. And we see where the federal NDP and liberals are sitting in the polls. Like they've collapsed into themselves. Do you think that on the provincial scale, people are going to make the association that NDP by provincial is the same thing as NDP by federal, and they'll struggle to? I mean, there was a story that was put out yesterday or the day before saying that UCP will get a supermajority with even with Nenshi at the helm. Do you think a big part of that is the alignment to the federals?
It definitely is. It was one of the areas that the UCP hit very hard with during the last provincial election. Even though Rachel Notley held some degree of popularity in Alberta, people have no use for Jagmeet Singh and his antics and what's going on. And the soft underbelly of the NDP, the thing that they hate discussing, is they get furious every time I bring it up. I wrote articles on that as well, is that constitutionally, they're not like any other party. They are not independent provincially. The provincial party is just a branch, it's a franchise of the federal one, and it's under their control if push comes to shove, and that hurts them. People was particularly in an area such as Alberta, when we've got regional issues with Ottawa, we want to know that our government at least is independent of whatever party is in Ottawa. I mean, the UCP shares some ideological views with the Conservative Party federally, but they are two completely separate parties. The NDP isn't. You can't buy a provincial NDP membership without becoming a federal NDP member automatically. And people don't understand that, and once they do, they're like, really? Like, I don't want any part of that. Well, you don't have a choice because it's just one party. It's not 10 parties plus a federal one. And even two, I believe, of the MLAs, and I can't even remember their names, the other women who were running for the leadership of the NDP that got pushed aside, have been talking about perhaps somehow breaking the NDP free from the federal entity because they realize that's an anchor hanging around their necks. And it puts them in a really hard spot. If Nenshi wins, he's not a traditional NDP sort. He's just a personal opportunist. But if he wins and he tries to break away from the federal NDP, he could end up shattering the party underneath himself. And but if he doesn't break away from the NDP, I can't see Naheed Nenshi and Jagmeet Singh getting along really well. Naheed doesn't like being told what to do. And again, you read the NDP constitution, sure, their federal entity really doesn't like going in and meddling around with the provincial branches if they don't have to. I mean, it's not good for the party. It's not good for them in general, but it is entrenched in their constitution. If there's a battle between the provincial and the federal NDP, the federal NDP takes precedence. So you're electing Jagmeet if you elect an NDP leader in Alberta, and that hurts every one of their candidates as people find that out. So they've got a lot to worry about there.
Yeah, and I know certain family members that were looking towards NDP up north in Edmonton. It was the same thing for them, that they'd agreed to go along with the NDP line just because they'd worked for certain unions, and they're being broadcast the same messages through the unions, how it's pro NDP, anti UCP. So they'd looked at going ahead until they realized it was a coalition, and that's what really stopped things. Put it dead in its tracks. Even on the same scale, the propaganda fed into family members. I'd heard the words, well, Justin was doing a really good job with the pandemic for what he had to work with. And it was like, what are you talking about? Like, how can you not see this? And it's only when, people start reading some of, the Independent, even My Voice, when they say, is this what's really going on? And it's like, well, here's the information. So yeah, no, I think that the anchor around the provincial, I'm not sure that King Nenshi is going to be enough to either hold the seats that that Notley flipped in the last election with the 10-month fear and smear campaign, and I think people have lost their taste for what these people are saying. The fact that we're all coming into this carbon tax thing, the increase 23%, 17 cents a liter on April 1st, and seeing where the NDP federal priorities right now are in stopping a war that's not even on the continent, that has nothing to do with Canada. And they're spending more time focusing on that and screeching about it from, whether it be provincial or federal side of things. It's like, well, first off, it's not our wars, whether it's the Ukraine or whether it's, Gaza, or even whether if it's the climate scam. I mean, we're such a low contributor of CO2, which is plant food to begin with. So they're more entrenched in fighting battles that really don't exist to Canadians than they are in focusing on Canadians. And to me, it's just shocking how they can show this rampant support to other people when there were Canadians, when there are Canadians living in tents, picking, dumpster diving for food, and they're still more focused on somebody else's problems, saying, "We'll get to you when we get to you." I don't see it as a good, strong political path forward.
No, it isn't at all. And as polarizing or as seriously as some people, whether on those issues in Ukraine or Gaza or whatever, even if they're people residing within Canada may be, when push comes to shove with Canada's policies, kind of as I said, they're completely irrelevant. Anyways, we spent an entire day with everybody fighting in Parliament yesterday over a motion that doesn't mean a damn thing. It's virtue signaling on the international stage. Israel couldn't give a hoot anything about that's coming out of the Canadian legislature. Ukraine and Russia don't care about anything that Justin Trudeau may say or do. We don't have the economic or military punch, nor the diplomatic, since our prime minister's a dingbat. Uh, Meanwhile, they're pissing around, spending all of this time in our parliament when, as you said, there's people in tents on the streets. We've got serious issues here that need to be addressed. If you're going to dedicate 308 people fighting for 12 hours in the House of Commons, let's hope it's over something that you can actually do something about. But they didn't. They're just pissing around, and it is frustrating Canadians. But this is where we're getting to a scary point, I think, federally. And both the NDP and the Liberals are realizing this is it. They are not going to win the next election, no matter what happens. But that makes them more dangerous than ever, because now their intent is, well, what can we entrench on the way out the door? What poison pills can we drop? What sort of upper decker can we leave in the prime minister's private washroom, or whatever they might want to do before they go? 2 more years of just seeing how much damage, or at least ideologically entrenched policies, can they stick in that are going to be difficult to undo for the next government. And when they're not fearful of the electorate whatsoever, when they don't care at all what Canadians think anymore, you think they're bad now, they can get worse, and I think they will.
Well, and I agree with you on that. The pharmacare plan that came out, I mean, it's really a nonsensical plan that's come out. I mean, it's birth control pills and some meds for diabetics. So the amount of people that are impacted by that are actually going to get anything from it, I don't think it's a huge, huge cropping. But then there's on the seniors dental care, on kids dental care, the kids dental care thing. I mean, people took the cash. They were never responsible for producing receipts. And from what I'd heard, no dentists were actually seen an uptick in business. And that's the same with the seniors dental care. Because of the way that they've rolled it out and because of the building system, no dentists want on board with this. So they have all these plans in place. And I think, if conservatives make the next election, which I pray that they do for a super majority on the federal side of things. I mean, provincial too, but on the federal side of things is when the conservatives go in, they're going to have to completely annihilate a lot of these programs because they don't make sense. They're just administrative tasks. So we're going to see a lot of more funds being paid out in administration than we're going to see benefits to Canadians. And they're going to come off looking as the bad guys by cutting all these programs. I mean, Freeland, that's her entire spiel yesterday in question period was cut, cut, cut. They want to cut all these programs. They want to cut all these wonderful things that we're doing. But when you look at how, minuscule or how few lives these programs actually impact, they're not really cutting anything. They're cutting away lunacy. But how much deeper are we going to get spent in before, or how many of these programs are going to be locked that'll do the damages that when they go to be reversed are going to be a lot tougher than removing, some benefits by way of pharmacare.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. The political fallout's going to come onto the next government, not this one. Things like the daycare, the $10 daycare. It's a joke. It's not been working well in any province. In Alberta, the daycare operators have been going on rolling strikes because the system's a mess. In Ontario, you've got as much as a 2-year wait to get a daycare spot. Welcome is just like healthcare. Once the government makes it free, that's great. But now access is the commodity. You got to manage to get into it. But still, if you try to undo that, the few people who are getting through, the few people who are getting $10 daycare, you can already see the sob stories. They're going to show the single mom with 6 kids who's blubbering because she can't pay her bills because she's lost her $10 daycare, and the evil Pierre Polyev wants her to starve on the streets. And I can already write the script on what's going to happen. But we just got to hope that we've got a strong conservative government that's willing to take the flack that's going to come with it and just say, too damn bad. This program is garbage. It's got to go.
Yeah, the swinging of the pendulum, as it were, right? UBI has been proposed by the Liberal government in their last mandates for election, and I've seen some of the comments come up on that, and they haven't really broached it too much. I mean, it's being talked about in some circles, but do you think that that's something that they're going to try and hammer through as the final Hail Mary and coming into the next election?
It's a terrifying one. And yeah, I could see them doing exactly that, say, next year. They're not going to do it in this session, but especially with one more year, if it's looking again more clear that they are not going to get back in, then let's just keep lobbing those ideological turds into the punch bowl. And UBI has been a big one for them. I mean, that's almost the crown jewel of modern socialism in an ostensibly democratic nation, right? Let's just give that baseline to everybody in wealth redistribution, whether they work or don't work or care or don't care, and just see how it works out. So, and again, it'd be a terrible one trying to do. You can imagine the backlash, but it'll have to be undone. We can't afford something that bad.
No, yeah, seeing what the costs potentially look like was like tripling the GST on all of our purchases, or the additional taxes that it was going to take. And I mean, we're already being stiffed with this carbon tax, the increase on the carbon tax, the CPP increases, the CPP2, plus just the cost this is run Canadians into with their mortgages. And that's actually another really good topic to talk about. I mean, when we see the number of mortgage delinquencies, unfortunately, Calgary and Alberta don't seem to be in that same boat, but I'd imagine they've increased somewhat here as well. Just people, saddling themselves with some debt because things were not terrible for a lot of years. They dig in a little bit deeper, they find out how much more groceries are, which is offensive. I mean, what we're paying for groceries now is insanity, and to think that that's going up from there. So there's going to be a little bit more of that, I'm sure, hitting Alberta over the next short period of time. But in places like British Columbia, in Ontario, where they're seeing the highest rates of delinquency is on mortgage, just caused by the interest from the overspending of the Liberal government. That's having a huge impact. I mean, what do you think that's going to look like for the housing market?
It's just going to get worse and worse. I mean, part of it, we haven't even touched that. I've only got about 10 or 12 minutes left here. I just got a note on that delivery, but we haven't touched on the mass immigration issue. I mean, Trudeau and the Liberals have been artificially trying to shore up the Canadian economy by pumping in immigrants. Because as you pour immigrants into the economy, you do give it an uptick in economic activity, and it looks good in the general GDP. But our GDP per capita is going into the toilet. The last 6 quarters in a row, it has dropped. And not enough Canadians are paying attention because their eyes glaze over on, we're talking GDP and stuff like that. Well, think of it as the chunk of pie per person. And in Canada right now, it's about $52,000 American per person. So by comparison, the Americans are at 70,000 per person in a chunk of the economic wealth. And they have lower real estate prices. So they've got more money and lower costs. We're having less and less money per person, lower and lower productivity, and the cost of everything is going up. This is a recipe for an economic catastrophe. Real estate is only going to keep going up. It's simple supply and demand, no matter how many times the irony is, too, the way the Liberals are trying to deal with it is selectively going to different cities and pumping more tax dollars in, saying we're going to fund the construction of more houses. Well, you pump more money and you again only put the costs up. You've got to cut the demand, but they won't do it. So we're in for much worse than what we've already seen if this trend continues. And I see no indication the government plans to take their foot off the gas with the immigration. So strap in, guys. It's only going to get more expensive.
And along those lines, of what we're seeing with the immigration, I mean, there's been some talk even like with the Canada pension plan now, and the Alberta pension plan, by contrast. So I know you've attended a couple of different town halls and going on with that. But we see what Ottawa's trying to do with the Canada Pension Plan. I think they've screwed that royally too. I think they've put a lot of the investments in the toilet, and that's why there is an additional CPP and a CPP too. But um, give me the high points on the Alberta pension plan, because I don't think enough people realize, what a benefit it could be to the people of Alberta.
Yeah, well, the main benefit is demographic. So, I mean, Albertans tend to be higher earners. They tend to be a younger population. If you're going to just add up the contributions as a whole versus what's being drawn by seniors in Alberta, if the province had its own plan, the excess from those contributions, which is 2 to 3 billion a year, which goes into the CPP and is sort of distributed amongst the whole, would actually stay in a provincial plan. So theoretically, that would start building more of an equity base within the plan if it was just a provincial plan. Now, there's a lot of issues that could happen. Alberta could screw up a plan just as easily as the feds if they built it wrong. But with the opportunity to bring in a new plan, the other thing is hopefully give a new plan a mandate to do nothing but build equity and maximize returns on investments. That's it, while minimizing risk to the capital. The federal one reeks of DEI, of ethical investments and garbage like that, directing their investments at green technologies that aren't necessarily going to offer a good return. And the board of the Canadian Pension Plan is appointed by the finance minister, by Chrystia Freeland. So this is troublesome. I mean, the biggest advantages we could have would be breaking away and trying to build a truly independent plan, independent of the politicians. And that's easier said than done, because conservative or liberal politicians by nature, they see a pot of money, they want to get their hands on it, if only to manage it for their own political benefit. But if done right, Alberta could break out of a plan that's not maximizing the returns for Canadians and form its own. And Albertans, at the very least, would certainly be doing better. And hopefully, maybe it would give a shakeup to improve the federal plan too, which really, despite all the people suddenly crowing, despite CPP even buying advertising, it isn't a great plan as far as returns go. And it's very much a pay-as-you-go plan. I mean, there's 500 billion in equity that started building since '97. But that covers 33% of what they need to put out every year. It's contributions going in and going out that manages this thing. It's not a fully funded plan, and that's not good in the long run. Again, especially when we're pumping in mass migration.
Yeah, I mean, and I think a lot of Canadians are told that the CPP is like the money that you put in there. That's the money that's there for you when you come out. And what I don't think a lot of Canadians realize is there's only 5 or 6 years of CPP that actually exists. So if people stop contributing now, or if we have this massive influx, or they screw up the investments on it, that 5 years goes down to 3 years. And when we're hit with a massive recession, that 3 years goes down to 0 years. And then all the people that were looking forward to having that nest egg in their own CPP bank account, that's all gone. One of the interesting statistics I'd heard, and I haven't dug deep into it, is because of the working age of Alberta, even if we left the CPP with $0 right now, we're at about 20 to 1 for working to pensioners. So that means that right now, if we left with $0, we would actually still be building more equity and more wealth inside of an Alberta pension plan, while still providing seniors the exact same coverage that they're getting. And we could just basically, rip the Band-Aid off and leave. Have you heard anything along the same? Like, is that where you think we're at?
Well, that's absolutely true. As I said, we've got the demographic advantage. I mean, there's going to be battles over the equity that exists within the federal CPP if we were to pull out over how much Alberta is entitled to. There's a few interpretations of that. But the province, in the meantime, could just pull out with an empty bank account and maintain the exact same benefits today, and they would still be putting 2 to 3 billion a year into the bank to build a fund. But you got to remember that the average pension payout for a pensioner right now is $758. It's squat. It's not a good plan. So it really wouldn't take that much for Albertans to pull out, maintain the current level of coverage, and then have an excess to actually improve upon that. So no, there's a good case to be made, but unfortunately, the provincial government sort of screwed it up on the rollout, and pension's gone a bit on the back burner for the time being. But I hope it comes back onto the front burner soon. But we really got to educate Albertans and make them clear that there is something better to be had here if it's done right. And I think a lot of Albertans will get on board it once they realize those numbers.
And you'd mentioned something else then that's, I think, another poison pill for the planet, has served zero function since they've even started rolling out the idea, but it's now called DEI. Diversity,
Equity and
equity, and
inclusion.
inclusion. And I'd looked at even signing up for some of the voluntary positions with the city of Calgary, and to see how DEI was entrenched in all of those, and it was like I don't think I can sit through one of these conversations. This is just too stupid for me. Um, like, how far do you see us pushing this DEI thing, either provincially or on federally? Are they going to keep hammering this into people until and we've seen it, I think, most predominantly, in the job sectors, if you want to work for provincial or federal governments, there's a certain amount of acceptance. But inside of the rainbow community as well. I mean, that's being pushed massively with Soji inside of the schools, right? So are we going to keep pushing this if we see a conservative flip on this? Or are we going to see some changes with this? Where are we going with this? I mean, that to me, that's the scariest thing is that when you take people that are, when they've lost their drive for a merit-based system, and we're left with them feeling special because of the color of their hair or because they have a bone pierced in their nose. No good can come from that.
No.
But yet those people are being set aside and celebrated. And I'm not saying it's the entire alphabet community, because I have a lot of friends inside of the that are gay. I'm going to go with that. I'm not going to say that
Hmm.
they're any part of any alphabet community, but I do have some gay friends, and they're a lot of them are opposed to the movement that's coming out just on that little segment. So, where do you see us heading with that?
Well, it's going to go one of two ways. I mean, as I said, Canada's productivity has been dropping in general, and it's not just due to immigration, it's due to a lot of things like that. If you don't have a merit based economy, whether it's in government or in the private industry, you are going to have lower productivity and more poorly producing people. So either we're going to hit the economic wall on this non merit based hiring and training and filling of positions. And as people get broke enough, they'll realize how stupid it is, or politically and generally people will realize how bad it is and push back enough that the government can start to undo some of those requirements and knots. Unfortunately, people don't tend to move till they get an economic kick in the butt, so it's got to get worse before it gets better. It will end, but it's just a matter of how poorly it's going to end.
Yeah, and I see there being, some sort of infighting inside of those communities as well, as the people that don't want to be associated, but they're automatically painted with the same brush on the levels of lunacy that they're willing to push these things. We need to tear down the Canadian flag and put up the rainbow flag. We need to paint this on all the sidewalks and all the rest of that, and everybody's saying no. Now, I know that there's some people outside of those communities that are like, well, yeah, so what's the big deal? Well, the big deal is because when we do that with one community, then everybody wants to. When we give it in on one set of terrorist terms, then the terrorists are going to keep coming back. And I mean, I throw around the word terrorists, because I do believe that there's no good that are coming out of these communities. And I'm not saying that, all gay people are terrorists. I mean, I don't want that to be the
No.
message that I'm driving. But we've seen it with even what we'd mentioned in Parliament yesterday. We have a pro-terrorist group, Hamas, that is the governing party of Gaza, and we have all these protesters inside of Canada. So the NDP buckled to the terrorist supporters. They did it on the ceasefire originally. Now they're doing it on another, I guess, semi-ceasefire with refunding or funding, more funding heading towards a terrorist organization through UNRWA, going directly to Hamas, and cutting down potential sales or whatever it looks like on that side. We've basically buckled, and when you buckle the terrorists, they don't stop. They just keep coming back for more. So that's what I mean about when we give certain groups this special attention, we let them think that they don't have to do anything to feel special. They just want to feel more special every day. Nobody's taking away anybody's rights. You get the same rights. We're just not going to celebrate, or we're not going to promote you through that. We still want to see you actually come up and show up with something.
Yeah, and people within minority communities of any sort, whether you're talking sexual orientation or race or religion, the ones with ambition, the ones who work hard, and there's many, many of them, they're sick of this. They want, like anybody else, to just work and get rewarded for their going above and beyond, whether it's as entrepreneurs or employees or whatever it may be. So hopefully, as more of the people in those communities get tired of this sort of non-merit based system, they'll speak up as well, because that'll have much more impact within the communities of people saying, hey, I've had enough of this crap, than people on the outside saying, it's got to stop.
Yeah. Now, Cory, I know you're pressed for time here, so I want to, take some time and just say that I appreciate you coming on, throwing out some
Glad to.
values, and I hope that I get a lot more people that have their opinions, that aren't afraid to say them, unapologetic Canadians that have lived through this, survived through this, and that are concerned with where we're moving forward. So, hey, thanks a lot for your time today, my friend, and I look forward to more chats in the future.
Thanks. No, love talking to you, Sheldon. And, kind of keep circling around to the same thing. How are we going to beat this? How are we going to beat this? This is how we're going to beat it. This is how we're going to bypass the legacy media and the government messaging is using these tools, the social media like you're doing right now, and just getting out to people and cutting through the BS. So I appreciate it. Love talking to you, and hope we can do it again soon.
I hear the sounds